My stepsister tormented my son at every family event by making jokes about his dad abandoning him. I made her husband leave her too. I had my son Jamie when I was 22, and his dad took off when Jamie was 2 years old. Just packed up one day and never came back. No child support, no visits, nothing. It was just me and Jamie for years, and we were doing great. He was a happy kid who loved dinosaurs and soccer and never really asked about his dad much. I'd told him age-appropriate stuff about how sometimes adults make choices that aren't about the kids, and he seemed okay with it. When Jamie was 8, my mom remarried this guy Leonard, who had a daughter named Brooke from his first marriage. Brooke was 30 and had this perfect suburban life with her husband Craig, and their 2 kids. She immediately started acting like she was better than me because she had a husband and a traditional family. The first Christmas after our parents married, Brooke kept making these little comments. She'd say things like how nice it was that all the kids had their dads there except Jamie. When we took a family photo, she said loudly that it was too bad Jamie's side would look empty. Jamie didn't catch on at first, but I saw him looking confused. I pulled Brooke aside and told her to stop. She laughed and said she was just joking, and I needed to lighten up. The next family gathering was worse. Brooke brought a football and suggested the dads teach the boys how to throw. Then she looked at Jamie and said maybe he could watch and learn since his dad wasn't around to teach him. Jamie's face just crumpled. Craig didn't say anything, just smiled like his wife was clever. I took Jamie home early and he cried, asking why his dad didn't want to teach him things. I was furious, but Mom said Brooke didn't mean anything by it and I was being too sensitive. This kept happening. Every single family event, Brooke would make these jokes. When Jamie got an award at school, Brooke said it was sad his dad missed it. When Jamie learned to ride a bike, Brooke said usually dads taught that. When Jamie joined Little League, Brooke asked who would practice with him since he didn't have a dad. Jamie started not wanting to go to family things. He'd fake being sick or beg to stay home. One Sunday dinner, Brooke really went for it. Jamie had made the honor roll and was showing everyone his certificate. Brooke said wasn't it funny how kids without dads always tried harder for attention. Then she turned to her own son and said he was so lucky to have Craig so he didn't need to work so hard for love. Jamie ran to the bathroom crying. That's when I decided Brooke needed to learn a lesson. I started paying attention to Craig at family events. Nothing inappropriate, just friendly conversation. I'd ask about his job, laugh at his boring stories, compliment his watch. Brooke noticed immediately and started getting possessive. She'd interrupt our conversations and physically put herself between us. Then I found out something interesting. Craig's coworker Lucy went to my gym. She mentioned Craig had been complaining about Brooke being controlling and jealous. He'd been thinking about leaving but stayed for the kids. I invited Lucy for coffee and got more details. Craig was miserable but didn't know how to leave without looking like the bad guy. So I helped him out. I started texting Craig about innocent stuff. Asking for restaurant recommendations for a date I didn't have. Asking what cologne he wore so I could buy it for a fictional boyfriend. Always innocent but frequent. Brooke saw the texts and lost her mind. She accused Craig of emotionally cheating. Craig said they were just friendly texts, but Brooke wouldn't let it go. She went through his phone, his email, his social media. She started showing up at his job to check on him. She called Lucy to ask if Craig talked about me. Craig was getting more frustrated every day. Then came the final straw. At Jamie's birthday party, Brooke made another joke about his dad missing another milestone. But this time, Jamie was ready. He said at least his mom loved him enough for 2 parents, while Brooke was so awful her husband was probably leaving. He'd overheard me on the phone with Lucy. Brooke went pale and turned to Craig. Didn't say anything at all, just looked at him with her mouth open. Craig pushed her hand off his arm and told her they needed to talk at home. They left without saying goodbye to Jamie, and I watched them drive away with this sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with triumph. The other parents started gathering their kids and making excuses about needing to get home, and within 20 minutes everyone was gone except me and Jamie, and a table full of uneaten birthday cake. I asked Craig if he was telling me this to make me feel less guilty. He laughed, but it sounded bitter and tired, not amused. He said no, he was telling me because I deserved to know that my plan worked, but not the way I thought it would. Brooke's marriage was ending because of who she was, not because I sent some texts about cologne and restaurant recommendations. The texts just gave Brooke an excuse to show Craig what he'd been dealing with for years, but had gotten used to ignoring. He said Jamie's comment at the party was the final straw, because it made him realize his own kids were learning Brooke's cruel behavior. Gideon had started making mean jokes about other kids at the school, and Craig saw where that came from now. He couldn't stay in a marriage that was teaching his children to be bullies. I sat there not knowing what to say because I'd wanted Brooke to hurt, but I hadn't really thought about her kids or what this would do to them. Craig stood up and said he needed to go, that he had a lot to figure out with lawyers and custody schedules. He stopped at the door and turned back to tell me he didn't blame me for what happened, but after Craig left, I sat on my couch staring at the wall for, I don't know how long. I got what I wanted, but it felt empty and complicated instead of satisfying. Jamie came out of his room where he'd been playing video games and asked if Mr. Craig was getting divorced because of us. My heart dropped into my stomach and I had to figure out how to explain adult relationships to an 8-year-old who already had abandonment issues. I pulled him down next to me on the couch and told him that grown-ups make their own choices, and nobody can make someone leave a marriage except the people in it. Jamie looked at me with these serious eyes and asked if Mr. Craig left because of what he said at the party. I explained that Mr. Craig and Aunt Brooke had problems before the party, before my texts, before any of this started. Sometimes adults stay in unhappy situations until something makes them realize they need to change. But that something isn't the cause. It's just the thing that makes them see clearly. Jamie nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully believe me, that he was carrying some guilt about his comment at the party. The next family gathering was Thanksgiving, and Helen called to ask if I was coming. Her voice was careful and neutral, like she was trying not to take sides, but also trying to hold the family together with both hands. I could hear the stress in every word, even though she was trying to sound casual. I didn't know if I could sit at a table with Brooke right now, not after everything that happened. I asked if Brooke would be there, and Helen said yes, and that Leonard thinks we all need to talk things through like adults. I almost laughed because adults had made this whole mess by not talking things through earlier. Helen added that it would mean a lot to her if I came, that she wanted her grandson at Thanksgiving and she missed me. The guilt worked, and I told her we'd be there. I decided to go to Thanksgiving because avoiding it would just make things worse, and I didn't want Jamie to feel like we were the ones being excluded. We'd done nothing wrong except defend ourselves after years of cruelty. When we arrived at Helen and Leonard's house, the tension was immediate and thick enough to choke on. Brooke was there with her kids, but without Craig, sitting on the couch looking smaller and sadder than I'd ever seen her. She wouldn't look at me or Jamie when we walked in. Leonard tried to act like everything was normal, asking Jamie about school and showing him some new tool he bought for his workshop. It made everything more awkward because we could all feel the effort he was putting into pretending. Halfway through dinner, Brooke's son Gideon asked where his dad was. The table went completely silent and Brooke's face crumpled like paper. She said something about Daddy needing some space to think about things, her voice shaking. Then she looked directly at me and added that sometimes people pretend to be your friend, but they're really trying to hurt you. Jamie gripped my hand under the table so hard it hurt. I felt Helen's warning look from across the table telling me not to respond, not to make this worse. I bit my tongue and focused on my plate while Leonard tried to change the subject to football. After dinner, Leonard pulled me aside into his office and closed the door. He said he understood I was protecting Jamie, but I went about it the wrong way, and now the whole family was suffering. I felt my anger rising up hot in my chest. I told him the family was already suffering every time Brooke made Jamie cry, but nobody cared about that suffering because it was just one kid instead of a whole marriage. Where was his concern when Jamie was faking sick to avoid family events? Where was his protection when Brooke was teaching her own son to be cruel? Leonard opened his mouth and then closed it again. He didn't have a good response to that, and we stood there in uncomfortable silence until Helen knocked on the door to say dessert was ready. On the drive home, Jamie asked why Aunt Brooke looked so sad. I was surprised by his empathy after everything she'd done to him, after all the times she'd made him feel less than. I explained that her husband left, and that's really hard even when someone hasn't been kind to you. Losing someone you love hurts no matter what. Jamie thought about this while watching the streetlights pass by his window. Then he said he was glad his dad left before he was old enough to remember him, because watching someone leave seems worse. The comment broke my heart because no kid should have to be glad about that. Michelle finally called me back after I'd apologized 3 times via text. We met for coffee at the place near her apartment. She told me she wasn't judging my choices, but she was worried about where my anger took me and what it was teaching Jamie. I admitted I was worried too, that the victory didn't feel like I thought it would. It felt messy and sad and complicated. She asked what I wanted to happen when I started texting Craig, and I had to really think about my answer. I realized I wanted Brooke to hurt like Jamie hurt, to feel abandoned and humiliated and less than, but I didn't think through what that would actually look like, didn't consider her kids or the family breaking apart, or Jamie learning that revenge was an acceptable response to cruelty. The school counselor called the next week and asked to meet with me without Jamie. I felt my stomach drop because calls from the school are never good. She explained that Jamie was showing signs of worry about adult relationships. He'd been asking other kids inappropriate questions about whether their parents were happy together. He'd expressed concern that people leave because of things kids do or say. The counselor recommended family therapy to help Jamie process the separation between his parents, and now the separation he witnessed between Brooke and Craig. She said Jamie needed help understanding that adults make their own choices. I resisted the therapy suggestion at first because it felt like admitting I damaged Jamie. But the counselor gently pointed out that Jamie was already dealing with abandonment issues from his dad leaving, and recent events had made his understanding of why people leave more complicated. She wasn't blaming me, she said carefully. She just wanted to help Jamie. I agreed to find a family therapist, feeling like everything I did to protect Jamie somehow hurt him anyway. I'd wanted to shield him from Brooke's cruelty, but instead I'd taught him that manipulation and revenge were how you handle conflict. I'd wanted him to feel defended, but instead I'd made him feel responsible for a marriage ending. I left that meeting feeling like I'd failed at the one thing that mattered most. I found a family therapist who had good reviews and specialized in kids dealing with abandonment. The waiting room had toys and books, trying to make it feel less clinical, but Jamie still gripped my hand tight when we walked in. The therapist was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes who introduced herself and led us to her office. Jamie sat pressed against my side on the couch, his small body tense. She started with easy questions about school and soccer, getting Jamie comfortable before moving to harder topics. When she asked about his dad, Jamie said he didn't remember him much, just knew he left when Jamie was little. Then he mentioned the jokes at family events, how his aunt kept saying things about his dad not being there. The therapist asked how those comments made him feel, and Jamie's voice got small when he said they made him think maybe his dad left because Jamie wasn't good enough. My chest hurt hearing him say that out loud. She moved to the birthday party incident, asking what he felt when he said those words to his aunt. Jamie thought for a minute, then said he felt powerful because everyone got quiet and listened, but also scared because the adults looked shocked and angry. The therapist nodded like this made perfect sense and told Jamie those feelings were normal. She explained that sometimes when people hurt us, we want to hurt them back, but that doesn't always make us feel better. Jamie asked if he was bad for saying mean things, and she said no. He was a kid dealing with adult problems he shouldn't have to handle. The next week I went alone while Jamie stayed with a sitter. The therapist asked about my anger toward Brooke and what I hoped would happen when I started texting Craig. I tried to explain it calmly at first, talking about protecting Jamie and wanting Brooke to face consequences, but then she asked what I really wanted deep down, and something broke open in me. I admitted I wanted Brooke to know exactly how it felt to be abandoned and humiliated in front of everyone, the same way she made Jamie feel over and over at every family event. I wanted her marriage to fall apart, so she'd understand what it was like to be less than, to have people pity you, to watch your perfect life crumble. The therapist didn't look shocked or judgmental, just kept listening. She asked if I got what I wanted, and I had to sit with that question. Yes, I did. Brooke's husband left, her marriage ended, she lost her perfect family image. But it didn't feel satisfying like I thought it would. It felt messy and complicated, and now Jamie was in therapy dealing with the fallout. The therapist said revenge often feels hollow, because it doesn't actually heal the original wound. It just creates new ones. She asked what would have healed the wound, and I realized I didn't know. Maybe nothing could fix the fact that Jamie's dad abandoned him, and Brooke's cruelty just poked at that wound repeatedly. November turned into December, and my phone rang with my mom's number. Her voice sounded strained when she was invited us to Christmas Eve dinner, like she was reading from a script. I asked directly if she wanted us there, or if Leonard was making her call. The silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer before she said anything. She finally admitted she didn't know how to handle having both Brooke and me in the same room, that every family event now felt like walking on broken glass. I told her we'd skip Christmas this year. Maybe things would be better by next year. Neither of us believed that, but we said it anyway because that's what people do. Helen said she understood, and that she loved us, and I believed that part at least. After I hung up, I sat staring at my phone, realizing this was another consequence I hadn't fully thought through. I'd wanted to punish Brooke, but I'd also fractured my relationship with my mom and cut Jamie off from his grandparents. Jamie came into the kitchen and asked what was wrong. I told him we weren't going to Christmas Eve dinner at Grandma's this year. His face fell and he asked why not. I tried to explain that things were complicated with the family right now, that sometimes adults need space to work through problems. He asked if it was because of what he said at his birthday party, and I quickly said no, this wasn't his fault. But Jamie's too smart for easy answers. He pointed out that we used to go to all the family stuff and now we didn't, and the only thing that changed was the birthday party. I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I tried to make it sound positive, saying we'd have our own special Christmas, just the two of us. But Jamie wasn't buying it. He asked why Aunt Brooke's feelings mattered more than his feelings did when she was being mean to him. That question hit hard because I didn't have a good answer. I said sometimes life wasn't fair, and adults made everything more complicated than it needed to be, which was true but not helpful. Jamie went back to his room looking sad, and I added it to the growing list of ways my revenge plan had backfired. I tried to make Christmas special with decorations and presents and hot chocolate, but it felt small and quiet without the chaos of extended family. Jamie opened his gifts and said thank you, but I could see he was thinking about his cousins and wondering what they were doing. I took him to see Christmas lights and we watched holiday movies, but the forced cheerfulness made the absence more obvious. On Christmas morning, just the two of us at our small table, Jamie asked if next year would be different. I wanted to promise him yes, but I'd learned not to make promises I couldn't keep. I said I hoped so, and that seemed to be enough for now. January brought cold weather and a return to normal routines. I was at the gym on a Saturday morning when I saw Lucy on the treadmill. She spotted me and her face went pale, like she wanted to disappear. I walked over because avoiding her would just make it weirder. Lucy immediately started apologizing, saying she never meant for her conversations with me to contribute to a marriage ending. She felt terrible about gossiping about Craig's relationship problems, like she'd betrayed his trust. I stopped her and said it wasn't her fault, that I deliberately used the information she gave me. If anyone should feel guilty, it was me. I'd been the one who decided to manipulate the situation, not her. Lucy looked relieved but still uncomfortable. She asked how Jamie was doing, and I said he was in therapy working through everything. She nodded and said she hoped things got better for us. Before she left, Lucy mentioned that Craig was doing okay. He had an apartment near his kids and seemed happier than he'd been in years. Then she added, almost like a warning, that Brooke was telling everyone at Craig's work that I seduced her husband. I felt that flash of old anger rise up, the same fury that made me start this whole thing. Brooke was playing the victim, rewriting history so she was blameless, and I was the evil other woman. But then I remembered the therapist asking what I hoped to accomplish, and I realized this was part of the consequence I'd earned. I got my revenge by helping destroy Brooke's marriage, and now I had to live with people thinking I was a homewrecker. That was its own punishment, and getting angry about it wouldn't change anything. I told Lucy thanks for letting me know and that I understood why people believed Brooke's version. It was easier to blame an outsider than to admit your marriage had problems. February started with a call from Jamie's teacher. My stomach dropped when I saw the school number because calls from teachers are never good news. She said Jamie had been asking other kids weird questions about their parents' relationships. Nothing inappropriate exactly, but concerning. He wanted to know if their parents were happy together, if they fought a lot, if the kids could tell when adults were going to leave. The teacher wasn't accusing me of anything, but she was worried Jamie seemed obsessed with whether people's parents would stay together. She'd also noticed him watching other kids' parents at pickup, like he was analyzing their interactions. I thanked her for telling me and said we were already in therapy working on this. After I hung up, I realized the birthday party incident had affected Jamie way deeper than I understood. He wasn't just dealing with his own dad leaving anymore. Now he was worried about all relationships falling apart, like he'd learned that people leaving was inevitable, and he just had to watch for the signs. Our next therapy session couldn't come fast enough. The therapist asked Jamie some gentle questions, and eventually he admitted what was really scaring him. He said he was afraid I might leave him like his dad did, and like Mr. Craig left Aunt Brooke. His voice shook when he said it, and I felt like someone punched me in the chest. The therapist worked with him, explaining that parents don't leave kids the same way married people leave each other. She used examples and drawings, showing how parent-child bonds are different from marriage bonds. But I could see Jamie's fear was real and deep, rooted in watching adult relationships fall apart around him. When the therapist asked me to promise Jamie I'd never leave, I pulled him close and said I would never, ever leave him, that he was stuck with me forever, whether he liked it or not. Jamie managed a small smile at that. The therapist spent the rest of the session working with us on building security despite the chaos in our extended family. She gave us exercises to do at home, ways to reinforce that our relationship was solid even when other relationships weren't. Jamie's 9th birthday came in mid-February, and I planned a small party with just his school friends at a local arcade. No family, no drama, just kids playing games and eating pizza. It felt safer that way, controlled. Helen sent a card with $50 and a note saying she missed us and loved Jamie. When I read it, tears started falling before I could stop them. I missed my mom too. Missed the easy relationship we had before everything got complicated. Jamie asked why I was crying, and I said sometimes people cry when they're sad and happy at the same time. I was sad we weren't close to Grandma right now, but happy she still loved us. Jamie seemed to accept this explanation. Later that night, after his friends went home and Jamie was in bed, I sat with the card and realized my revenge on Brooke had cost me my relationship with my mom. I didn't know how to fix that without pretending I was wrong to protect Jamie, and I wasn't willing to do that. The next day, I called Michelle and told her about the card and how much I missed my mom. She listened while I talked through all my feelings, then suggested I reach out to Helen directly and try to repair our relationship separate from the Brooke situation. She pointed out that my mom was caught in the middle, trying to keep both her new husband and her daughter happy, and that wasn't fair to her either. I decided Michelle was right and called my mom that evening. Helen answered on the second ring, and we had the longest, most difficult conversation we'd had in months. I told her I needed her to protect her grandson more than she needed Leonard's daughter to like her. She started crying and said she knew that she'd failed Jamie by not standing up to Brooke sooner. She admitted she enabled Brooke's behavior because she wanted Leonard's family to accept her, wanted this new marriage to work. She'd prioritized keeping peace over keeping Jamie safe, and she was sorry. Hearing my mom cry made me cry too, and we both sat there on the phone just crying together. Finally, Helen said she wanted to fix this, wanted to be part of Jamie's life again, even if that meant setting boundaries with Brooke. I said I wanted that too, and we agreed to start meeting for lunch once a week, just the two of us, to rebuild what we'd damaged. Our first lunch happened at a quiet diner halfway between her house and my apartment. Helen ordered a salad and picked at it while I drank coffee and waited for her to start talking. She asked about Jamie first, how he was doing in the school, if he still liked soccer. I told her he was doing okay, but still had some tough days. She nodded and her eyes got wet. Then she started talking about Brooke. She said Brooke was struggling with the separation, sleeping at her parents' house most nights because the empty house made her too sad. Craig had moved into a small apartment near his office and was seeing the kids on weekends. Helen's voice got quiet when she said Brooke told everyone I manipulated Craig, that I set out to destroy her marriage because I was jealous of her perfect family. I sat there listening and didn't defend myself because honestly, I did manipulate things. I sent those texts knowing Brooke would see them. I made Craig feel understood when his wife made him miserable. But I also didn't apologize because Brooke spent years making my kid cry and nobody stopped her. Helen seemed to understand without me saying much. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We agreed to meet again next week. The lunches became our thing. Every Thursday at noon, same diner, same booth in the back. Helen would update me on family stuff and I'd tell her about Jamie's life. She never pushed me to forgive Brooke, and I never asked her to take my side against her stepdaughter. We just slowly rebuilt what got broken. By late February, we were laughing again, sharing stories about Jamie when he was little, talking about work and normal life stuff. It felt good having my mom back, even if it was just for an hour each week. Then in March, my phone rang with Craig's number. I almost didn't answer because we hadn't talked since that conversation in my kitchen. He got straight to the point. Gideon had a soccer game on Saturday and asked if his dad thought Jamie might come watch. The boys used to play on the same team before everything fell apart. Craig said he was trying to keep things normal for his kids and he knew Jamie probably missed his cousins. I asked if Brooke knew he was calling me. He said no and that she'd probably be mad, but he was doing what was best for Gideon. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds before saying yes. Jamie deserved to have his cousin in his life if they both wanted that. Plus, I was curious how Brooke would react to seeing us there. Saturday morning, I told Jamie we were going to Gideon's soccer game. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. He asked if Aunt Brooke would be there, and I said probably yes, so we needed to be polite, but we didn't have to talk to her if he didn't want to. He nodded seriously, like he understood. We got to the field early and found seats on the bleachers near midfield. Other parents were setting up chairs and kids were warming up on the grass. Gideon saw us and waved from across the field. Jamie waved back with this huge smile. Then Brooke arrived. She was carrying a folding chair and a cooler, talking to another mom. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered. When she turned and saw us sitting there, her whole face went cold and hard. She didn't yell or make a scene, but she very deliberately turned her back to us and sat down on the opposite side of the field. I could hear her voice carrying across the grass, talking loud to the other parents about how some people just can't respect boundaries, how some people always have to insert themselves where they're not wanted. Jamie heard it too. He looked at me with worried eyes and asked quietly if we should leave. I felt this swell of pride at how aware he was of the tension, how he was trying to protect me from awkwardness. But I also felt sad that my 8-year-old had to deal with adult pettiness. I told him we were staying because Gideon invited us and we had every right to be there. The game started and I tried to focus on the kids playing. Gideon was good, fast, and aggressive like his dad probably was at that age. Jamie cheered when Gideon scored and I could see Brooke's shoulders tense up every time Jamie's voice carried across the field. The whole game felt like walking on broken glass, everyone pretending everything was normal while the tension sat heavy in the spring air. When the final whistle blew, Gideon ran straight to Jamie. The boys hugged and started talking about some video game, laughing and shoving each other like nothing had changed between their families. Craig walked over to us and thanked us for coming. He looked relaxed, happy even, like he'd shed some weight he'd been carrying. I told him Jamie had a great time. Across the field, I could see Brooke watching us with this look on her face that was part anger, part hurt, part something else I couldn't name. She looked betrayed, like Craig bringing us here was another wound on top of all the others. I watched her pack up her chair with shaky hands and realized Craig was moving forward with his life, while Brooke was stuck replaying everything that went wrong. And then I had this uncomfortable thought that maybe I was more like Brooke than I wanted to admit. We'd both hurt people to protect our own pain. We'd both chosen revenge over healing. The difference was Craig's leaving freed him while my revenge just gave me a different kind of weight to carry. The therapy sessions kept going every week. By mid-March, I started noticing Jamie seemed lighter somehow. He laughed more easily, didn't flinch when other kids talked about their dads. One session, the therapist told me privately that Jamie was doing really well, that kids are tougher than we think when they have support. She said the work we were doing now would help him process not just the recent stuff with Brooke and Craig, but also his own dad leaving. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said my willingness to look at my own behavior in therapy, to admit I made mistakes and manipulated things, was teaching Jamie healthy responsibility. It was showing him that grown-ups can mess up and own it, instead of just blaming everyone else. That helped balance out the revenge part of the story, so Jamie wasn't learning that hurting people back was the answer to being hurt. One afternoon in April, Leonard called me. I stared at his name on my phone screen for 3 rings before answering. We hadn't talked since Thanksgiving when everything was awful and tense. His voice sounded careful when he said hello. He told me he'd been thinking a lot about everything that happened. He said he understood why I was so angry at Brooke even if he didn't agree with how I handled it. Then he asked if there was a way forward where Jamie could be part of the family again. He said his grandkids kept asking about their cousin, and Helen was sad about the family being split up. I listened to him talk and felt this mix of anger and relief. Anger because it took him 5 months to care about Jamie being excluded. Relief because at least he was trying now. I told Leonard I'd be willing to come to family things if Brooke agreed to stop making comments about Jamie's dad. But I wasn't going to pretend we were friends or act like what she did was okay. Leonard got quiet for a minute. Then he said Brooke was still really angry and felt like I ruined her marriage. I pointed out that her marriage had problems way before I sent a single text message. Leonard admitted that was true. He said Craig had complained to him privately about Brooke's jealousy and control issues years ago. But he also said Brooke wasn't ready to look at her own role in anything yet. She was stuck in victim mode, blaming me for everything wrong in her life. We ended the call without solving anything, but at least we were talking again. That same week, I met Michelle for coffee. I told her about Leonard's call and asked what she thought I should do. Should I push for family reconciliation, or just let things stay separate? Michelle stirred her coffee and thought about it. Then she said something I needed to hear. She said Jamie seemed way happier now without the stress of Brooke's comments at every gathering. She said sometimes protecting your kid means accepting that some family relationships are just bad for you. Not every family bond is worth saving. I sat there thinking about how much easier life had been these past few months without dreading family events. But I also missed the idea of Jamie having cousins and extended family, even if the reality was always complicated. Michelle pointed out that Jamie was seeing Gideon at soccer now anyway, so he wasn't completely cut off from his cousins. Maybe that was enough. May brought playoff season for Jamie's soccer team. They'd had a good year and made it to the semifinals. Raoul pulled me aside after practice one day and asked if any family would be coming to watch the playoff game. Jamie was standing nearby and said quietly that it would just be us like always. I heard the resignation in his voice, like he'd accepted that family events weren't for him anymore. My heart hurt hearing that acceptance. As soon as we got home, I called Helen. I told her about the playoff game and invited her and Leonard to come watch. I made it clear I wasn't inviting Brooke. Helen hesitated for just a second before agreeing. She said they'd love to come support Jamie. It felt like a small step toward building a new version of family, one that didn't include everyone but could still work. The playoff game was on a Saturday afternoon. The weather was perfect, sunny but not too hot. I got there early to save seats and saw Helen and Leonard walking across the parking lot. Leonard was carrying this huge poster board sign with Jamie's number on it decorated with soccer balls and stars. When Jamie saw them in the stands, he broke into this huge grin. The game started and Helen and Leonard cheered louder than anyone else there. They jumped up when Jamie's team scored. They yelled encouragement when the other team had the ball. Leonard held up his sign every time Jamie touched the ball. I watched Jamie play better than I'd ever seen him play. He was confident, aggressive, totally focused. When his team won and advanced to the finals, Jamie ran straight to the stands. He climbed up and hugged his grandparents with pure happiness on his face. Helen was crying and Leonard was laughing and Jamie was just beaming. I stood there watching them and realized something important. Jamie could have family support without Brooke being involved. He could have grandparents who loved him and showed up for him. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe a smaller family that actually cared was better than a bigger family that hurt him. The week after the playoff game, the therapist asked to meet with me alone. Jamie stayed in the waiting room playing on his tablet while I sat in her office. She settled into her chair and looked at me with that calm expression therapists always have. "Do you regret what you did?" she asked. I sat there for a long minute trying to figure out how to answer honestly. I regretted that Jamie overheard my phone calls with Lucy. I regretted that he got involved at all and said what he said at his birthday party. I regretted that the family split apart and holidays were now complicated. But I didn't regret making Brooke face consequences for her cruelty. I told the therapist all of that, trying to sort through the mess of feelings. She nodded and wrote something in her notes. Then she said something that made me feel less guilty. The consequences happened naturally from Brooke's own behavior and Craig's choices. My texts were just a catalyst for problems that already existed in their marriage. Craig was already unhappy. Brooke was already controlling and jealous. I just gave those issues a focal point. That didn't make what I did right, but it meant I didn't destroy a happy marriage. I just helped speed up the end of an unhappy one. School ended in early June and Jamie came home with his backpack full of papers and art projects. We sat at the kitchen table sorting through everything when he looked up at me. "Can we go to the beach this summer?" he asked. "Like we used to before Grandma married Leonard." I realized we hadn't taken a vacation in over a year. We'd been so caught up in family drama and therapy sessions that I forgot to focus on building good memories for just the two of us. I pulled out my laptop right there and started looking at beach rentals. I found a small cottage about 2 hours away that had availability for the last week of June. The pictures showed a blue house with white trim, close enough to walk to the beach. I booked it immediately and showed Jamie the photos. His face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. We spent the next 2 weeks planning what to pack and what we'd do at the beach. Jamie made a list that included building sandcastles, swimming, finding shells, and eating ice cream every day. I added sunscreen and books to my own mental list. The drive to the beach was easy with good weather and light traffic. Jamie talked the whole way about what kind of sandcastle he wanted to build and whether we might see dolphins. When we pulled up to the cottage, it looked even better than the photos. The owner had left a welcome basket with local cookies and information about nearby restaurants. We unpacked quickly and headed straight to the beach. The sand was warm under our feet and the ocean stretched out forever. Jamie ran toward the water and I followed, both of us laughing as the waves crashed over our ankles. We spent the afternoon building an elaborate castle with towers and a moat. Other families walked by and complimented our work. Nobody knew us or our complicated family situation. We were just a mom and her kid having fun at the beach. That night, we ate fish tacos at a casual restaurant with outdoor seating. Jamie got sunburned despite all my sunscreen efforts, and his nose was bright red. After dinner, we walked along the boardwalk and got ice cream. Jamie picked mint chocolate chip and I got strawberry. We sat on a bench watching the sunset turn the sky orange and pink. "This is the best day ever," Jamie said with ice cream on his chin. I agreed and felt some of the tension I'd been carrying for months start to ease. The next morning, we went back to the beach early before it got too crowded. Jamie wanted to look for shells, so we walked along the waterline with a plastic bucket. He found sand dollars and spiral shells and pieces of sea glass. I found myself actually relaxing for the first time in forever. No family events to dread. No worried looks from Helen. No therapy appointments. Just me and Jamie and the ocean. We built another sandcastle, and this time Jamie insisted on making it a whole kingdom with multiple buildings. We worked on it for hours, adding details and fortifications. When the tide started coming in, we sat back and watched the water slowly destroy our creation. Jamie didn't seem sad about it. He said we could build another one tomorrow. That afternoon, back at the cottage, Jamie got quiet while we were making sandwiches for lunch. I could tell something was on his mind. Finally, he looked at me and asked if we could talk about Aunt Brooke. My stomach tightened, but I said yes. Jamie sat at the kitchen table and started telling me how he felt when Brooke made those jokes about his dad. He said he used to think maybe his dad left because Jamie wasn't good enough. Maybe if he'd been better at sports or smarter or funnier, his dad would have stayed. And Brooke's comments made that feeling worse. Every time she mentioned his dad being gone, it felt like proof that something was wrong with him. I put down the sandwich I was making and sat next to him. I told him his father leaving had nothing to do with him. His dad left because he couldn't handle being a parent. That was about his dad's problems, not about Jamie. And Brooke's cruelty came from her own insecurity. She felt bad about herself, so she tried to make other people feel worse. Jamie nodded, but I could see tears in his eyes. I hugged him, and we sat there for a while not saying anything. Later that day, we went swimming, and Jamie seemed lighter after our talk. We played in the waves, and he dunked me underwater when I wasn't expecting it. I chased him through the shallow water, and we both ended up laughing and exhausted. That night, we watched a movie on the small TV in the cottage and ate popcorn. Jamie fell asleep halfway through, and I had to carry him to bed. Looking at his peaceful face, I felt grateful we'd taken this trip. He needed this break from everything as much as I did. The next morning, Jamie woke me up early because he wanted to watch the sunrise from the beach. We walked down in our pajamas with blankets wrapped around us. The beach was empty and quiet. We sat in the sand and watched the sky change colors. Jamie leaned against me and asked if I was glad Mr. Craig left Aunt Brooke. I struggled with how to answer that honestly without teaching him that revenge was good. I thought about it for a minute while the sun came up over the water. Finally, I said I was glad Brooke understood how it felt to be abandoned and humiliated. She needed to know how much her words hurt. But I wished it hadn't happened in a way that hurt her kids or made our family fall apart. Jamie was quiet for a bit. Then he said he was glad he didn't have to hear jokes about his dad anymore. But he also said he missed seeing Gideon. I told him maybe they could still be friends even though things were complicated with the adults. Jamie nodded and said he hoped so. We got back from the beach on a Sunday afternoon. The apartment felt stuffy after a week away, so I opened all the windows while Jamie unpacked his bag. Monday morning, I went to get the mail and found a thick envelope with Brooke's return address. My first thought was to throw it away without opening it. But curiosity won, and I took it inside. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pages covered in Brooke's handwriting. I started reading and felt my anger building with every sentence. She wrote about how I destroyed her family, how I manipulated her husband with my texts and my friendly conversations, how I was a terrible example for Jamie, how I turned her own son against her at the birthday party. Page after page of blame and victimhood. Not once did she mention the years of cruel jokes about Jamie's dad. Not once did she take any responsibility for making an 8-year-old cry at family gatherings. It was all about what I did to her. How I ruined her perfect life. How her kids were suffering because of me. I read all 3 pages twice, feeling my face get hot with anger. I pulled out a notebook and started writing my own letter back. I wrote about every single comment she'd made about Jamie's dad. Every joke, every subtle dig, every time she made him feel less than her own kids. I wrote about asking her to stop and being told I was too sensitive. I wrote about Jamie faking sick to avoid family events because of her cruelty. I wrote about finding him crying after she said kids without dads try harder for attention. I filled 4 pages with everything I'd wanted to say to her for 2 years. When I finished writing, I felt exhausted but also clearer. I read through what I'd written and realized sending it wouldn't accomplish anything. Brooke wasn't ready to hear it. She was stuck in her victim story where I was the villain who destroyed her marriage. Nothing I wrote would change that. I folded up both letters and threw them in the trash. The therapist would probably say that was a healthy choice. July came with hot weather and long days. Jamie had soccer camp in the mornings and spent afternoons at Michelle's house with her kids. I was at work when my phone rang with Craig's number. I stepped outside to take the call. Craig asked if Jamie would want to join Gideon at a baseball camp he was signing him up for. He explained he had the kids for 2 weeks and wanted to give them activities. Gideon had specifically asked if Jamie could come. I felt touched that the boys still wanted to be friends despite everything. The camp was a week long, from 9 to 3 each day. Craig said he'd handle drop-off and pick-up for both boys if I agreed. I told him I'd ask Jamie and call him back. That night I mentioned it to Jamie and his face brightened immediately. He asked if it meant he and Gideon could be friends again. I said yes, the boys could be friends even if the adults had problems. Jamie wanted to go, so I called Craig back and confirmed. The next Monday morning, Craig picked Jamie up at 8:30. Jamie had his glove and cleats and a water bottle. He was excited and nervous at the same time. I watched them drive away and hoped this would be good for him. The week went smoothly with Craig handling all the transportation. Jamie came home each day tired and happy, talking about drills and scrimmages. On Friday, I told Craig I'd pick Jamie up myself since I got off work early. I drove to the baseball fields and parked in the lot. Kids were scattered around in their team shirts, parents collecting equipment and water bottles. I spotted Jamie near the dugout talking to Gideon. Then I saw Brooke walking across the field toward them. My stomach dropped. We hadn't been face-to-face since the birthday party. I got out of my car and started walking toward Jamie. Brooke reached the boys first and hugged Gideon. Then she looked up and saw me. For a second I thought she might yell or cause a scene, but she just looked tired and sad. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She didn't say anything to me. She just took Gideon's hand and walked back to her car. I watched her go and realized she looked as exhausted by all this as I felt. Jamie ran over to me with his gear and asked if I saw Aunt Brooke. I said yes. He asked if we were still fighting, and I said it was complicated. He seemed to accept that answer. On the drive home, Jamie talked about baseball camp and how much fun he had with Gideon. Then he got quiet and said Gideon's mom seemed sad when she picked him up earlier in the week. He asked if Aunt Brooke missed Mr. Craig. I thought about how to answer that. I said probably yes, because even when relationships are unhealthy, ending them still hurts. Jamie thought about this while looking out the window. Then he said he hoped Aunt Brooke found someone nice. That surprised me. After everything she'd done to him, he still had empathy for her. I asked him why, and he shrugged. He said she was mean, but she's still Gideon's mom and Gideon loves her, so she must not be all bad. I felt proud of his ability to see things in a complicated way, instead of just black and white. In August, Helen called and asked if we'd come to her birthday dinner. She said Brooke would be there but had agreed to be civil. I was nervous about it, but I also missed Helen and wanted to celebrate her birthday. I agreed to come and told Jamie we were going to Grandma's house. He asked if Aunt Brooke would be there, and I said yes. He asked if there would be drama, and I laughed and said I hoped not. The dinner was on a Saturday evening. I brought flowers for Helen, and Jamie brought a card he'd made at camp. When we arrived, Leonard answered the door and smiled when he saw us. He hugged Jamie and shook my hand. The house smelled like roast chicken and garlic bread. Brooke was already there with her kids. She was sitting on the couch when we walked in. We made eye contact but didn't speak. I sat in a chair across the room and Jamie went to play with Gideon and his sister in the den. Helen came out of the kitchen and hugged me tight. She whispered thank you for coming. Dinner was awkward but not hostile. We all sat around the table and Leonard said grace. We passed dishes and made small talk about weather and summer activities. Brooke and I didn't speak directly to each other, but we managed to exist in the same room. I could see Leonard relax as the meal went on without any fights. Helen looked happy to have most of her family together, even if it wasn't perfect. After dinner, we had cake and sang happy birthday. Jamie helped Helen blow out the candles. It wasn't comfortable, but it was civil. That felt like progress. After everyone left, I helped Helen clear the table and carry dishes into the kitchen. Brooke was already there, stacking plates by the sink. Helen glanced between us and said she needed to check on Leonard, then disappeared back into the dining room. The kitchen got quiet except for the sound of running water. Brooke scraped food off a plate and didn't look at me. She set the plate down carefully and wiped her hands on a towel. Then she said quietly that she knew she was mean to Jamie and she was sorry. I almost dropped the dessert plates I was holding. My hands shook a little as I set them on the counter. I managed to say that I was sorry her marriage ended even though I played a role in it. She still didn't look at me, just nodded and picked up another plate. We didn't hug or say anything else, but something felt different. Like maybe we could exist in the same room without everything being awful. Helen came back in and started talking about leftovers, and the moment passed. The next week, I took Jamie to see the therapist. We sat on the familiar couch, and I told her about the dinner and Brooke's apology. Jamie listened and picked at a loose thread on his jeans. The therapist asked him how he felt about what Brooke said. He thought for a minute and said he accepted her apology, but he didn't want to be alone with her yet. The therapist nodded and said that was very wise. She explained that Jamie was learning healthy boundaries, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or immediately trusting someone who hurt you. She looked at me and said, Jamie was becoming emotionally intelligent despite everything that happened. I felt proud listening to her say that. Jamie asked if it was okay to still be mad at someone even after they apologized. The therapist said absolutely, that feelings take time to change, and he didn't have to force himself to feel differently. On the drive home, Jamie seemed lighter somehow, like having permission to feel complicated things made it easier. September came and Jamie started 4th grade. He picked out his backpack and new shoes and seemed excited instead of nervous. The first week went smoothly, and at parent night his teacher pulled me aside. She said Jamie was empathetic with other students and good at conflict resolution. She'd seen him help 2 kids work out an argument over a soccer ball at recess. I thought about everything that happened over the past year and wondered if maybe he learned something valuable from our messy family situation. The school counselor stopped by our conversation and said she'd check in with Jamie monthly, just to make sure he was continuing to process things in a healthy way. I thanked her and felt grateful that so many people were looking out for him. A few weeks later, I was at one of Jamie's soccer games, sitting on the metal bleachers with the other parents. Craig showed up and sat a few rows down. After the game ended, he walked over and asked if he could talk to me for a minute. We stood by the fence while Jamie ran around with his teammates. Craig mentioned he was dating someone new, a woman from his gym who had kids of her own. He seemed genuinely happy when he talked about her. I realized he was building a new life separate from all the drama with Brooke. I told him I was glad he was moving forward and not stuck in anger. He smiled and said it felt good to start fresh. Then he went to collect Gideon and I watched him go, thinking about how people can rebuild after everything falls apart. That weekend, Helen called and asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. We went to a cafe near her house and ordered sandwiches. After the server left, Helen leaned forward and said she needed to tell me something. She explained that Brooke was in therapy and working on her insecurity and need to put others down. I felt skeptical, but also hopeful, because I wanted Jamie to be able to have a relationship with his aunt and cousins eventually. Helen said Brooke's therapist was helping her understand how her behavior affected people. It was progress even if it came about in a painful way. I asked Helen if she thought Brooke would really change. Helen sighed and said she hoped so, that Brooke needed to do the work for herself and her kids. We finished our lunch and hugged goodbye in the parking lot. Thanksgiving arrived and Helen invited both families to her house. I was nervous driving over with Jamie. He asked if there would be drama and I said I hoped not. When we got there, the atmosphere felt cautious but not hostile. Brooke was already in the living room with her kids. She didn't make any comments about Jamie's father. During dinner, she even asked Jamie about school in a genuine way. He answered politely but kept his distance. I didn't push him to be warmer than he felt comfortable being. Leonard said grace and we passed dishes around the table. The dinner felt like we were all trying to figure out a new normal. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't terrible either. After we ate, the kids went to play in the den and the adults cleaned up together. Nobody brought up the past or tried to force closeness. We just existed together for a few hours, and that felt like enough. In December, Jamie came to me while I was making dinner and asked if he could invite Gideon over for a playdate. I was surprised but pleased that he wanted to maintain that relationship. I told him yes and texted Craig to coordinate instead of going through Brooke. Craig said Gideon would love that, and we set up a Saturday afternoon. The boys spent hours playing video games and building with Legos in Jamie's room. Their laughter carried through the apartment and made me smile. When Craig came to pick Gideon up, he stood in the doorway and thanked me for making this happen despite everything. I told him the boys deserved to be friends regardless of what the adults did. He agreed and called for Gideon, who hugged Jamie goodbye before running to the car. Christmas planning was different this year. Helen called and suggested splitting it between multiple small gatherings instead of one big family event. Jamie and I did Christmas morning alone in our apartment. We opened presents in our pajamas and ate cinnamon rolls for breakfast. Then we drove to Helen and Leonard's house for lunch. It was just the 4 of us and felt relaxed and easy. Later that afternoon, we went to Craig's new apartment where Jamie saw his cousins briefly. The divided family was our new reality, but it was functional and less stressful than forcing everyone together. On the drive home, Jamie said it was a good Christmas even though it was different. I agreed and felt grateful that we'd found a way to make it work. Our final therapy session of the year came right before New Year's. The therapist asked Jamie what he learned from everything that happened. He sat quietly for a moment and then said he learned that adults make mistakes and that standing up for yourself is important, but revenge makes everything complicated. He added that he was glad people couldn't make his mom leave him and that families can be messy, but still love each other. The therapist smiled and said those were very mature observations. She told Jamie she was proud of how much emotional growth he'd shown. Jamie grinned and asked if that meant he didn't have to come back. The therapist laughed and said he could take a break, but she was always here if he needed her. I had my own final session a few days later. The therapist asked if I would do anything differently. I admitted I wished I'd confronted Brooke directly instead of manipulating her marriage, but I also didn't regret that she faced consequences for her cruelty. The therapist listened and then pointed out that I'd done good work helping Jamie process everything and teaching him accountability and boundaries. She said that mattered more than whether my initial actions were perfect. I left her office feeling like maybe I could forgive myself for the messy way I tried to protect my son. January rolled in cold and quiet. Jamie and I found our rhythm in this new version of family. Helen called every Tuesday to check in, and we'd meet her and Leonard for lunch on weekends at this diner halfway between our places. The conversation stayed light, focused on Jamie's schoolwork and soccer practice, and nobody brought up Brooke unless she came up naturally. We kept things polite with Brooke at the few family gatherings we attended, nodding hello and keeping our distance across the room. Jamie had Gideon over twice that month to play video games in our living room while I made them pizza rolls and listened to their laughter echo down the hallway. It wasn't the big, happy, blended family I'd pictured when Mom married Leonard, but it worked better than forcing everyone together and pretending the past year hadn't happened. Michelle met me for coffee on a Saturday morning and told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything after the initial mess. She still thought I'd gone too far with the whole Craig situation, but she admitted Jamie seemed happier and more confident than he'd been in months. She pointed out that protecting your kids sometimes means making choices that aren't perfect or pretty, and that Jamie thriving was what mattered most in the end. I appreciated her honesty because she never sugarcoated things or told me what I wanted to hear. A birthday card arrived in our mailbox in early February with Jamie's name written in Brooke's careful handwriting. I watched him open it at the kitchen table, his face cautious as he pulled out the card and read the message inside. Brooke had written that she was sorry for making him feel bad about his father, that she'd been dealing with her own problems and took them out on him in ways that weren't fair or kind. Jamie read it twice and then looked up at me and said he forgave her, but he wasn't ready to spend a lot of time with her yet. I told him that was completely okay, and he could take as long as he needed to feel comfortable. Looking back now, I know I made choices that were complicated and messy and had consequences I didn't see coming. But Jamie is happy and confident, and learning how to handle conflict in healthy ways that don't involve revenge or manipulation. Our family is smaller and more broken apart than it was before, but the people in Jamie's life now treat him with respect and kindness. I protected my son the best way I knew how, and even though the path was rough and full of mistakes, we ended up somewhere better than where we started.